So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning from Crete. Good afternoon, because we have some participants from Australia. It's a great honor to welcome in this last for this academic season, Athena talk Professor Bill Buchanan from the School of Computing from Edinburgh Napier University. A few words about the speaker. He's a professor in the School of Computing at Edinburgh Napier University. He has appointed as an officer of the Order of the British Empire in the 2017 birthday honors for services in cybersecurity. This is also reflects his quality as a teacher, but also as a researcher. His research interests include applied cryptography, security, digital forensics, distributed systems, computer science. His work has received more than 7,500 citations, and his H index is 49. The potential of his research also reflects on H10 H index, which, if I remember well, is 135. I would like finally to highlight something very important for me. He's an excellent teacher, and this shows that since 2011, he has won a Student Teaching Award for teaching excellence. And the same award has been awarded to Bill in 2014, in 2015, in 2019, in 2023. So this shows a part of an excellent scientist. He's an excellent teacher. In my opinion, an excellent teacher should be an excellent scientist, and an excellent scientist should be an excellent teacher. This is one story. Today, the title of his talk, his contribution is Advancements in Quantum Cryptography. So once again, on behalf of the organization committee of the Athena Colloquia Talks Bill, thank you very much for the honor, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Just give me a little minute. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Okay, great. Okay, so as we know, there are two things that are going to disrupt our world completely. They're going to disrupt everything. They're going to disrupt our home life, our work life, our business. Everything will change. Okay, so we've started the internet about 50 or 60 years ago, and it really wasn't a good design. But we've got there eventually that we now have a fairly secure internet, and we also have one which is trustworthy. But there are two things that will shape our future, and those are AI and quantum computing. I won't talk about AI, but you probably can see the effect that AI is having just now. Impersonation fraud is on the increase, and we will have to get used to a new threat landscape. The other thing that's going to come along is quantum computing. And like it or not, it is going to completely change the internet and everything that we do at the current time. And we will have to migrate to something called a post-quantum world. And I'll explain what that really means in a little minute. So I've got my encryption keys. So here's my public key. There's Bob's public key, and there's Bob's private key. And these are magical keys that really make the internet work, or make the internet more secure and more trustworthy. And if it wasn't for these two things, then you wouldn't even be able to trust this connection that we actually have. You wouldn't know if it was fake or not. And if it wasn't for the magic of these keys, then anybody could spy on our communications, anyone. Luckily, we have public key encryption. We have encryption to make sure that everything is trustworthy. So in this presentation, I'm going to do a little bit of Crypto 101. I appreciate some of you, maybe students and professors, and you may know lots about cryptography and encryption and so on. So just in case that you don't, and you would like some revision, I'm going to do a Crypto 101. I'm going to explain cryptography, the subject that I teach and research. I got into this area over a decade ago, and I adore and I love this area. And every single day I find new things to research and learn about. So I'll try and explain what cryptography is all about and the importance of it. Then we'll have a look at what a quantum computer is and why we should be so worried and also so excited. Quantum computing will bring great benefits. It will open up new areas of research and innovation, but it will also cause great problems to our existing security of the internet. Then we'll have a look at the basic methods of post-quantum cryptography. So I can leave a link so that you can actually investigate on your own the methods that are actually involved and run the code. But I'll try and explain some of the basic techniques that are involved with post-quantum cryptography. And then how we're going to evolve over the next few years into having a new landscape of cryptography. Then a little bit about the opportunities that quantum computing will bring. And then finally, I'll look at some conclusions overall. Okay, so let's do some Crypto 101. And I'm revising a lot of the methods and techniques that you've probably heard about for years. So it was Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman around 1977 who came up with the first public key encryption method. I'll explain what public key encryption is. Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman at MIT came up with the opportunity for a trapdoor function, so that I could have a public key and I could have a private key. I could distribute my public key to anyone, and then only my private key would be able to decrypt it. This is known as a trapdoor function, in that we can actually create a special key which will open up a trapdoor and release the data that we actually have. So in this paper was based on the ideas of Whitfield Diffie and Marty Hellman around 1976, who created the Diffie-Hellman method for key exchange. We'll see that in a little minute. And Whitfield Diffie thought about the opportunity of creating this magical public key encryption method where we could actually use two keys together. And it was Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman who came along and actually discovered the first method. And it's still used now. Probably when you're connecting to Zoom today, it is likely that Zoom will have an RSA public key that you check. It is likely that you will store the public key of the verifier of that public key on your computer. RSA has been around for so long and it is so useful. Unfortunately, its days are coming to an end because of quantum computing. And it was in the RSA paper that Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman came up with the concept of A and B. A sends something to B and will digitally sign something. Then we associated the names of A and B with Alice and Bob. You can, in your own language or in your own culture, you can come up with your own A and B. It just happens that this is a US type English naming system, but there is nothing to stop you from defining A and B as whatever you want. And in cybersecurity, we need to make sure, if we are white hats, that A and B can communicate together, and A and B can actually verify each other, their identity to each other. Unfortunately, as we know, there are adversaries, and those adversaries are typically defined as Eve, a passive adversary, and Mallory, who is an active adversary. So Eve listens to your communications. Mallory goes ahead and changes them or installs ransomware. So we need something that both Bob and Alice trust, because there's very little things that we can actually trust on the internet. So we have the concept of Trent. And Trent is otherwise known as the PKI, or the public key infrastructure. It is the way that we can verify the public key of any entity at any time through the public key infrastructure. And it is Trent who provides us with the public key of Bob in a verifiable form. I have here a digital certificate. This is a digital certificate here. And we can see the thing it contains is Bob's public key. And this is verified by Trent. Trent puts their signature on this digital certificate and verifies Bob's public key. It is one of the least understood areas of cybersecurity, and even industry professionals struggle with the whole concept of the public key infrastructure and digital certificates. Then we also get other actors such as Peggy. Peggy is a prover. I can prove to you that I know something. And then Victor, is a verifier. So Peggy proves something and Victor verifies it. We have other ones. Wendy knows a secret. Faith, Sybil, and so on. Carol, Dave, Faith, Grace, and so on. And these are the people that we tell stories about in cybersecurity. We want to be able to enable the communications and tell stories about Bob and Alice and Peggy and Victor. Okay, so let's do some basic Crypto 101. I appreciate this is probably going to go over things that you've already done already, but I thought I'd just lay the landscape. So we live in an analog world and computers live in a digital world. They only understand ones and zeros. As we'll see, quantum computers live in a different world. But normally the computers that we have understand ones and zeros, and we understand characters and colors and text and so on. So we need some way to be able to convert our characters, our formats, into a binary method. And one of the ways that we can do that is with an ASCII format where we represent each character as a byte. In cryptography, we deal with bytes. We end up with a byte array. It's a whole lot of bytes. We modify all our bytes together. Then when we encrypt, we end up with what's called ciphertext. We take plain text and we convert it into ciphertext. Now it becomes non-viewable. We can't have our nice text anymore. We have characters that cannot be viewed on the screen. So we need some way to represent our binary values. And the two main ways that we do that is with hexadecimal or with base 64. If I want to represent an encryption key, I would use hex format or base 64, and the computer can encode that in a binary format. Okay, so with hex, we take 4 bits at a time, and we convert it into a hex character. And the good thing is that we only need to count up to 15 to be able to convert any bit stream into a hexadecimal value. For base 64, it's slightly different in that we have a table here. And with the table, we take 6 bits at a time. We take our bit stream, we split it into 6 bits. And then in this case, this is a 25, and we represent that with a Z. Then we have multiples of these 4 character values. And if we don't fill them all, we end up with an equals at the end. So we can typically spot base 64 format with equals at the end. It doesn't always have to have equals, but that's showing us that it's base 64 format. So the first cryptography method that we meet is what's called a one-way function or a one-way hash. It is a way that we can squeeze the data. We can keep squeezing and squeezing and squeezing until we get a fixed length hash value as an output. So one of the first that was created with this was MD5 with a 128-bit hash. We can have 2 to the power of 128 different hash values. So we can't represent every single data element that we're ever likely to come across. So unfortunately, we will end up with what's called a collision. A collision happens when we have two different data inputs and they create the same hash value. Unfortunately, in MD5, it's not that difficult to actually create that. In fact, it's really simple. I can take an executable program, I can install a Trojan backdoor into the program, and I can produce the same hash value for the program. In fact, I can take 3 images and I can stuff bytes into these images to make sure that the MD5 hash of each of the images is actually the same. So MD5 shouldn't really be used. SHA-1 was better, 160 bits, but Google managed to crack SHA-1. So we shouldn't really be using it now. It has been deprecated from the internet. I'll explain the new methods that we have. Okay, so with a hash value, we will take our data, squeeze until we get it down into a fixed length hash value. And we shouldn't be able to reverse mathematically or with programmability it back to our data. Unfortunately, it is crackable because we can create a whole rainbow table or we can use brute force on our hash values. But if the hash value is large enough in the number of bits, then it will be very, very difficult for us to actually determine the original piece of data that caused this hash value. So the values that we have, we shouldn't really be using MD5 or SHA-1. The ones that we should be using are SHA-256 or SHA-512. These were standardized by NIST in the SHA-2 competition. And then NIST decided that they were a bit worried about the Merkle-Damgard method, that's the MD. They were a bit worried about the methodology. NIST is always very worried that something's going to get cracked in crypto. So they said, let's come up with a new method. That new method was the SHA-3 competition, and a team from Belgium who also created the AES method came up with what's called a sponge method. And the sponge could absorb data. And that was known as Ketcha, and it became the SHA-3 standard. So we can use SHA-2 or SHA-256, SHA-3, and one of the alternatives to this in the SHA-3 competition was called Blake-2, or Blake originally, and it was super fast. Blake-2 is faster than virtually every hash that we had at the time, and Blake-3 is even faster. So in applications that really need speed, then Blake-2 is extremely fast, and you'll see it used in many applications. In Ethereum, we typically use the SHA-3, but in most cases, we use SHA-256, and it gives us a big enough hash. In applications that require a variable length hash, let's say we want 1,000 bytes or 10,000 bytes of a hash value, then we can use what's called an XOF function. And these are some of the methods here, shake128, shake256, and we can vary the length of the hash value that we have. The first cryptographic method that we have is called symmetric key. And it's the most basic. And basically, we have the same key to encrypt as we have to decrypt. Just like when you open your front door, you use your key, and you can make a copy of that key. Then when someone locks the door, then it is possible to open the door with the same key. Okay, so this is known as symmetric key encryption. So we take the plain text from Bob, then we use a secret key, and Alice uses the same secret key. We encrypt and then decrypt with that. The most popular methods here are AES, Cha-Cha-20, 3DES, and so on. So there are many different symmetric key methods, but these are the two main methods that are used just now. 3DES is still used in bank cards and so on, but really it needs to go, and we need to replace it with AES and Cha-Cha-20. Each of these has various modes, like we can have ECB mode, CBC, and one of the most popular is what's called the GCM mode. I won't explain too much about GCM mode, but we can add in additional data. So it's authenticated encryption with additional data. We can add in some data into the encryption process that Alice can also add in too. And she won't be able to decrypt unless she adds in the extra data. So for this, we typically add in a session ID so that Eve cannot play back the session again. One thing I don't show here is that we also add a salt value or an initialization vector into the encryption process to make sure that it's always changing. So the salt value must also be used by Alice along with this additional data and the key to be able to decrypt the data. So how do we get the key from Bob to Alice, knowing that Alice is actually listening, Eve is listening to the conversation? Well, this was, as I've said earlier, this was solved by Whitfield, Diffie, and Marty Hellman in 1976 with a classic paper that outlined the Diffie-Hellman method. And this used discrete logarithms. Basically, Bob could come up with a secret B, and Alice could come up with secret A. These are integer values. We typically deal with integer values in cryptography. Bob sends over a public key value of g to the power of b mod p, where p is a large prime number. The mod operation gives us the remainder of an integer division. Alice does the same thing. They send it over, and because a to the power of, this is the rules of logs, gives us that. Okay, if you remember from school, and g to the power of a to the power of b gives us g to the power of ab. And this is the rule that we're using here. And the great thing about this is what's called a finite field. Finite fields means that we can only have between 0 and p minus 1, and then we go round again like a ring. The great thing about the mod p operation is that we can do all our maths like multiply, divide, add, and subtract, and they still work. Isn't that amazing that we can actually do that? All discovered by John Napier, who discovered it in this building here all those years ago. An amazing opportunity. And it's this discrete log problem that's hard. And the difficulty is that I cannot determine the value of b, even though I know p and g. G is called a base. Typically, it's the value of 2 or 3 or 5. It's the little number. I cannot tell what the value of b is, even though I know those are the values from there. Unfortunately, quantum computers can break that quite easily, but this is known as a hard problem at the current time. Okay, so we end up with our key exchange from there. Unfortunately, it is broken, and it works very well, and we're using it now when we're communicating, but unfortunately, Eve can get in between and be the Eve in the middle. And in this case, Eve negotiates 2 keys with Bob and Alice, and they don't know that they're actually not communicating directly with each other. Eve then breaks the communication and has 2 encryption keys, so can actually read all of the communications between Bob and Alice. So we need something else. The key exchange is wonderful. Eve can't tell what the key is that we're generating, but we need something else. And that something else is public key encryption. So the way the public key encryption works is that if Bob is sending to Alice, then Bob takes Alice's public key and encrypts the data to get a cipher. And then Alice will use her private key to decrypt the data. So this is the basics of our public key encryption. Where it becomes magical is that we can also get a digital signature. With this, if Bob wants to prove that he is Bob to Alice, what he does is he takes a hash of the message and then uses his private key to be able to encrypt or modify the hash to create a signature. And then Alice uses Bob's public key to be able to check the signature on this. And now this is what we can now use with the Diffie-Hellman method, because with the digital signature, we can actually prove that we're communicating with Alice because she will be able to sign things with her private key. The other thing that we can actually have is that rather than using the Diffie-Hellman method, we can actually exchange the key that we want to use for the encryption tunnel with public key encryption. Just the same as we had with public key encryption, Bob can generate a key and then encrypt it with Alice's public key. He sends that over, and then Alice will decrypt that with her private key and then recover the same key. This is known as a key encapsulation method, or a KEM. And if you remember that, then what we'll look at later for post-quantum cryptography is that we'll be dealing with a KEM. We're using public key encryption to pass the key. At the current time with TLS 1.3, we don't use this method anymore. The reason we don't use it anymore is that a long-term leak of Alice's private key using this method will release all of the keys that Bob and Alice have used in the past. This is a real problem and has been deprecated, but we need to come back to this method when we're looking at post-quantum cryptography. So then, how does this all work together? Well, here's my digital certificate. With a digital certificate, we have the public key of Bob, and it is signed by an entity. So we can see here that Trent is signing that key. So he takes Bob's public key. He will then wrap that in a certificate, take his own private key, and digitally sign the certificate. Then, when Alice reads the certificate, she checks Trent's public key, which is installed on her computer, and then is able to verify that the certificate can be trusted because she trusts Trent. She can then extract Bob's public key from the certificate and knows that it can be trusted. If there's any break in this any break of this trust, then the public key would have to be revoked. So one example of a digital certificate, a digital signature, is ECDSA, as used in Ethereum and Bitcoin. So this is the mask that we have here. I'll explain elliptic curves in a little minute, but we sign with a private key. We have a random nonce value that we should remove. We take a hash and we create a value called R and S. These values of R and S are then used with a hash value of the received message and the public key together, and we can now prove that the signature actually works. It was based on the DSA method, which was created a long time ago, and it used discrete logarithms. Okay, so now let's look at the basics of our basics of quantum computers. So Moore's law has actually worked pretty well. Basically, Moore, a long time ago, when he worked for Intel, said that the number of transistors that we can have in a microchip doubles every 2 years or every 18 months or so. And that's kind of happened over time, and it still has, it still is working. There's only one factory in the world which actually can produce these high quality chips. And these are producing transistors that are about moving towards 4 nanometers. When you think that that's about 10 times the size of an atom, then you can actually see the size of these transistors are so small now. And we've probably got to the end of making them smaller and smaller and smaller and getting a greater density. The only way that we can probably move on is to start to look at the optical spectrum. And with the optical spectrum, we can actually start to scale up even more. So with that, we now can look at quantum computing. And with this, rather than a bit, we defined it as a qubit. And a qubit is a photon of light that can actually change its polarity and state. And along with this, we get new new gates that will replace our and or and functions that we have at the current time. So these are some of the 1-bit gates that we get in a quantum circuit. And the amazing thing about a quantum machine is that we can have what's called superposition, in that a qubit can exist in any state at the same time, and it's only when we actually measure the state do we actually determine that it's a 1 or a 0 equivalent. So which means that I can be in Edinburgh and I can be in Glasgow at the same time. And it's only when you measure where I actually am can you actually determine what state or where I am in the world. And it was Peter Shaw that came along with an amazing algorithm that actually showed that he could break public key encryption, both for the discrete log problem and also for the RSA problem and the Diffie-Hellman problem. So the 3 problems, discrete logs will be broken, RSA will be broken, and also the Diffie-Hellman method that we outlined. So he came up with a way to actually use a quantum machine to be able to break or factorize the method. And then Grover came along and actually identified that it was possible, because a quantum computer can work in parallel, why don't we try lots of symmetric keys at the same time? So we could try 2 to the power of 128 different keys and then find the one that actually worked. So Grover's algorithm cracks symmetric key encryption. And this is the reason that we need to also look at symmetric key encryption for the breaking of quantum circuits. Luckily, all we have to do is to move from 128-bit symmetric key to 256-bit symmetric key. So symmetric key will be okay, but public key will be broken completely, and we need to find new methods. So let's have a look at quantum post-quantum cryptography, or PQC. So already the US is running fast with this, and the EU and other countries in the world need to be moving on post-quantum cryptography, especially for critical national infrastructure. That includes energy, education, healthcare, government, and so on. So critical national infrastructure covers many of the things that keep our world moving. So already the US is moving towards finding all of the legacy public key encryption and replacing it with post-quantum cryptography. And for this, they've been working with the NSA, NIST, and the National Security Agency and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency to be able to implement a plan to migrate our existing public key encryption methods from all of the national infrastructure. And this has been happening for a while back. So we can see the SHA-1 competitions, the SHA competitions, but the post-quantum cryptography ones have been running for a few years now. And there's a chance, 1 in 7 chance that RSA will be broken by the end of the decade. And then there's a 1 in 2 chance that it will be broken in the next decade after that. So the worry will be that we have this time window here where our adversaries could be gathering data just now and harvesting it, and then when a quantum computer is built at scale, they will be able to decrypt all of that information. And remember, that will include all our electronic transactions, Bitcoin, and all of our secret communications. Okay, so as I said, there's the basics of it. Basically, we roll together public key encryption and key exchange. They're together, KEM, and public key encryption. They're wrapped in together with our encryption methods. So the three main methods that are going to be cracked in terms of post-quantum cryptography are RSA. RSA takes two prime numbers and multiplies them together. The difficulty here is to be able to factorize back to P and Q. If we can do that, then we crack RSA. With elliptic curve, I'll explain that in a little minute, we have an equation such as this. If we can crack that modulo square, then we will break elliptic curve cryptography, and a quantum computer can do that too. And the other method uses the discrete log. L-gamma encryption is one that we have there, and it's used quite often these days for zero-knowledge proofs and so on. So these are the three main methods that will be cracked. And the assumptions just now that we base the whole of the security of the internet on are these hard problems. These are hard problems just now for our existing computers, but a quantum computer can break most of these. So it can break factorizing, it can break the prime numbers together, that breaks RSA. It can break the modulo square, breaks elliptic curve. It can break the Diffie-Hellman problem. It can also break the, if I can find it, the discrete log problem here, okay? But our existing internet is based on all of these basic hard problems that don't become hard problems anymore. Elliptic curve came along and it allowed us to create small encryption keys and lightweight digital signatures and so on. This is the basic equation here. So in an analog form, we end up with a beautiful little curve. Elliptic curves are beautiful forms. In a discrete form, we end up with little dots, but let's not actually think of them as little dots just now. Think of them as a curve. The thing about an elliptic curve is that when I take a point and I add another point onto it, I get another point on the curve. And I can keep going until I always get another point on the curve. I can double the point, I can add the points together, I will always get a point on the curve. So with elliptic curve, we have what's called a base point, that's G, and then we have a scalar value, SK, our private key. We then multiply, it's not quite multiply, and we end up with a point on the curve called the public key, or it's SK times G. Basically, it's adding G, SK times. It's a simple operation, and it's really quick to actually do that. So our public key becomes this, and our private key becomes this. Unfortunately, quantum computers will break this. The main curves that we use are these. SEPT256 is used for Bitcoin and Ethereum. P256 is probably what you're using just now on the Zoom connection. But there's an even nicer curve called curve 25519. That then produces the signatures of ED25619 and ECDSA. And we have key exchange methods of ECDH, elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, and X25519. The way that Shor's algorithm works is that if we create two waves and they have a certain period, if those period are the two prime numbers, then we can tune the waves until they reach a point that they cross over. If we measure that, that becomes the value of n, or the modulus, and we can just very simply determine P and Q from the wavelengths of the waves that we've actually produced. So in this way, it is fairly simple for us to tune the circuit to be able to find out what the factorization is of our modulus n into p and q. Okay, so let's look at the methods that are being proposed for here. I won't go into the details of these and how the math works. There's a website here that you can go to, and you can see all of the maths and all of the codes and everything like that. I'll just try and give you a quick overview of the basic methods. The methods that are hard problems for a quantum computer are hash-based, symmetric-based. These are using our traditional hashing and symmetric key components that we have. We can have a code-based one. Code-based is like an error correction code. So when you have a CD-ROM, I know that we don't use CD-ROMs anymore, but we have what's called an error correcting code on there. If I scratch the CD-ROM, then that error correcting code can correct any of the bits on the CD, and I can hear the music perfectly. We can have multivariate. I'll explain that in a little minute. That's having lots of variables. But the big winner is lattice-based cryptography. I'll explain that in a little minute. But that's the one that's probably the fastest, most efficient method overall. And it's the one that's been chosen most often by NIST as the new standard. And then there's a new kid on the block called isogenes, and they got cracked in the last round, not because isogenes were cracked, but because the parameters that we selected were cracked. The good thing about the NIST competition is that some of the methods that were actually submitted were cracked by academic research teams. So rather than them being broken when they went live on the internet, academics went ahead and tried to break them. Rainbow was broken, and Psyche was broken too. Luckily, they found it at the very last stages of the competition, so they were dismissed. With lattice methods, we create a multiple lattice with thousands of accesses, and we just move the XY coordinates or the multiple coordinates a little bit to skew it off a little bit. And then we end up with multiple points. And the hard problem here is that if I add a little bit of noise to the point, it's actually a hard problem to find the point that is the nearest to that point. It's actually the nearest to a vector to it. With this, what we do is that we convert our bit values into what's called a polynomial. So if you remember from school, a polynomial looks like this: x to the 5 plus 2x4 plus x to the 3, and so on. These representations allow us to be able to use our mathematics in using polynomial values. We can multiply polynomials, we can divide, we can take a mod p of a polynomial, but this allows us to be able to do our normal computation. So there are two main methods here we use. NTRU can be used to sign and encrypt, and a method that's been around for a long time is what's called learning with errors, and those are the two core methods that we can use. So I won't go into any detail here, but you can look up the basic theory. The other methods that we have is code-based methods, and as I said, these are methods that are based on our error correcting codes that we have. GOPA codes is the ones that we use, but you may have come across Hamming codes that we have used in the past. Okay, so here's a simple example here. We're using Hamming codes and how we can actually create our encryption here. Then a really exciting area of cryptography is called multivariate cryptography. And with this, we can have multiple variables, x, y, w, and z, and have 4 equations here. And it's actually a really difficult problem to be able to work out what the values of x, y, w, and z is. But if we put a trapdoor into the multivariate equations, then it is possible for us to be able to drop the values through, and we can actually determine them. This is also known as the oil and vinegar method here. And then a method that's been around since the mid-1970s is called hash-based signatures. With this, I create my private keys, and then I hash them. I can hash two together, and then I get what's called a root hash. So it's the way that blockchain works. We have a root hash for the block that we're actually creating, and it's impossible for us to change any of the data values. With this, I can have lots of private keys, and whenever I use them, I can then prove to the receiver that I know the path to go from my key up to the root key. So I couldn't have created any new keys that will be there. This is called a Merkle tree, and it's used extensively. The problem with this is that I need to remember all of my keys that I've used in the past. Luckily, Daniel J. Bernstein, really a genius in cryptography, and I highly recommend that you read his work if you can. He came up with a method that eliminated the state, and this is known as Sphinx Plus, where I don't have to remember the keys that I've used in the past. I can keep using the keys from that. So this has been well researched, it's well proven for its security, and it's well grounded. Isogenies, though, are not so well studied and are just new, but have exciting opportunities. With this, we can have two elliptic curves, and then the isogeny is the mathematical mapping of one point on one curve to another one. And only if Bob and Alice know that mapping or the generation of the key, then it's possible for them to be able to create their keys using this isogeny method. Another method is called symmetric key or multi-party computation in the head. And in this, we can actually create what's called a zero-knowledge proof of our key. So rather than us showing our private key, we can create what's called the zero-knowledge proof to show that I still know my key. And from that, we can create our signatures. So in the end, NIST selected 4 methods: crystals, Kyber for key exchange, and dilithium, Falcon, and Sphinx Plus for the digital signatures. But they're a bit worried that Lattice might get cracked, so we're now into another round to look at the other methods that could be used. So here's Kyber here. So we can see it has an 800 byte public key, so it's much bigger. The ciphertext is 768, so the keys are getting bigger now. Here's another example with NTRU. And here's dilithium. So here's the public key size and the private key size here. And this is the length of the signature. So like it or not, our signatures and our public keys are going to get bigger. Just now, they're about 64 bytes and 32 bytes. So post-quantum cryptography is likely to give us larger key sizes. Here is Sphinx Plus, and look at the size of the signature, 17,000 bytes to create a simple signature. But the key sizes are very small, even the same size as our elliptic curve ones that we have just now. And the great thing is that if we move to lattice-based cryptography, we open up what's called homomorphic encryption. So all of these methods here, it started with Gentry, actually use lattice-based cryptography. So if we move towards post-quantum cryptography, we should automatically be able to migrate towards homomorphic encryption. This will allow us to be able to encrypt our values, but still process them. And for GDPR and so on, this will be a dream because we won't have to store our data in an unencrypted format. Okay, so I won't go into the detail here, but this is the assessment of this is how NIST assessed the performance of each of the methods. We can see this is the key exchange performance. This is the encapsulation of the key. This is the decapsulation of it. And we can see generally Kyber was fast in most of the areas, where down here in Macalise, we can see that the performance of the key exchange is massive. It would take too much energy to create a key pair in Macalise compared to Kyber. then we can assess the key sizes. I won't go into the detail here. But again, Kyber doesn't do too badly in terms of the sizes of the keys that it ends up with. For digital signatures, dilithium was the winner. And again, it does pretty well in key generation, signing, and verification, where some of the methods here, such as Rainbow and Sphinx Plus, are extremely slow in terms of their key generation and so on. Okay, what's likely to happen is we're likely to use what's called a hybrid method. A hybrid method means that we'll be putting both the elliptic curve key exchange method and the Kyber method in the same data packet, which means that we can use both a post-quantum cryptography one or an elliptic curve one, and eventually we'll drop the elliptic curve one. So what's likely to happen is for us to have these hybrid methods. And it's also going to happen for our signature methods too. Okay, so here we are. So this will have to be replaced. So our certificates will have to have a post-quantum cryptography public key, probably dilithium. And over here, when we're doing our key exchange, this is likely to be Kyber. So we'll start to see certificates that will have both our existing cryptography and our post-quantum cryptography in the same certificate. And then when we're doing a key exchange, it will be elliptic curve, and it'll also be our post-quantum method. So if we take Kyber plus elliptic ECDH, then we end up with a data packet of 864 bytes, which is fine because 1500 bytes is the typical size of a data packet, which means there will be no overhead in our TLS communications with this. But unfortunately, with our signatures, we're going to need at least 2 data packets to send dilithium signature, and up to 12 packets if we're using Sphinx Plus. So we need to find a way to be able to reduce this overhead that we have. What we're doing now is that we're moving towards the next round of signatures. So these 3 signatures were approved, and these are the new key exchange methods that are going forward for evaluation. So it's likely that Kyber will be, in addition to Kyber, we will have one or more of these methods approved for key exchange. And then for signatures, there's actually quite a lot of new signatures that are being evaluated at the current time that would replace, that would be an addition to dilithium, Falcon, and Sphinx Plus. If you're interested, I've got some evaluations of these different methods, but I won't go into that just now. But they all vary in the sizes of the keys and so on, and will vary in terms of their performance too. So this is a typical evaluation that we would do for the number of operations that it takes to sign a key and to generate a key pair. Unfortunately, one weak area is a side channel. So a side channel is where you would determine something secret from radio emissions or from electrical noise. And many cryptography methods are weak for this. So is it possible for me to put an antenna above a chip and listen to it and then to be able to determine the private key from it? Unfortunately, many of the existing methods that have been approved by NIST are very weak in terms of side channel analysis. Luckily, there are new methods coming through, such as Raccoon, which are more resistant to side channel analysis. And Raccoon is going forward in the next round of NIST evaluation. If you're interested, this is the basic method that's used for dilithium here. And this is the method that we use for Raccoon, which overcomes the problem of our side channels. So the last little thing, we can also use our quantum computing for new circuits and cybersecurity. So if you want to go and try a quantum computer, you can go into Azure or AWS, AWS Braket. and there should be a quantum computer online. So if I go here, we can see here that AWS has a number of quantum computers. Some of them are real quantum computers, but are limited in the number of qubits that we have. We can also use a simulator if we have a quantum circuit that we want to evaluate. And we can use a Python equivalent for quantum circuits called Q# to be able to implement these things. Okay, so this will give us opportunities to move our existing machine learning methods into quantum gates. And you can see a lot of research papers are now outlining how you can take existing machine learning and create it as a quantum circuit and then run it on a quantum computer. These are some of the areas that are being applied, such as a CAPTCHA. It's possible to solve a CAPTCHA problem using a quantum circuit. And these are some of the quantum computers that are currently online just now. If you're interested, we've just published a paper in Springer Nature, which looks at botnet detection using a quantum circuit. And we've also been using it for chaos theory for cryptography. Okay, so finally, we're coming to the end of Moore's law, and we need to move on our processing to scale up. We need to migrate our existing key exchange methods towards something like Kyber and our signatures to dilithium. We need the migration to happen soon. So we're probably looking at hybrid methods, and also that quantum computing could be useful for cybersecurity applications and simulating them. And then for highly secret data that must be kept secret for at least a decade, you need to start your migration now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill, for this excellent and very informative talk. Please stop sharing the screen in order to start the Q&A session. I know that you have to go to a ceremony, so you will tell us when to stop and how much time do we have for questions. I will start with a question that is already on the chat. Let me read it, or I don't know if you know. It comes from Saman. Is there any mathematics proof that the LWE can resist against quantum computers?
It's been around for many years, and it's been proven to be secure, but I don't think there is a formal proof as yet for that one. So that's the worry about lattice. That's why NIST want to approve other methods, is that they still worry that lattice might cause problems for us. So that's a good question. So I don't think there is a formal security proof for it.
Thank you very much, Saman, for the question, and Bill for the response. Any other questions? Because I have some. Any other questions from the audience? If not, I will start the discussion, and if you have, just raise your hand and switch on your microphone. So, Bill, you know, first of all, I would like to excuse myself for the questions. I'm coming from a completely different area, but we are following, you know, this development of quantum computers fundamentally from the spintronics point of view. So how do we exploit the spin of electrons in order to encode the information in a more secure way, and also to increase the capacity of the information that we can transfer. So I would like to ask you, the encrypted signal, in your case or in general, is a modulated optical or electrical signal? Do I perceive well?
It's an optical signal.
Modulated in amplitude or in frequency?
As a qubit. I'm not a physicist. I understand the post-quantum cryptography. The physics of quantum computers are a little beyond me, but obviously in the quantum computer, then it's light, it's photons of light. It isn't an electronic circuit. Obviously within our post-quantum cryptography, we are using traditional silicon to be able to implement these methods so that a quantum computer can't break it.
Correct. So thank you very much. I suspect that they are doing both of the modulations in the optical signal. And this is my another question that generated to my mind from your response. You mentioned at the end that you have problems with the noise. However, if you are going to use the laser signals, like they are very monochromatic and you modulate it, where the noise comes from?
The noise, the noise is in the post-quantum cryptography. I'm not talking about the noise in the quantum computer. The noise is added into the lattice to make it a hard problem. So it's learning with errors. You add a little bit of error into your values, and then when you multiply and divide and so on, it's actually a difficult problem to find the point in the lattice which is nearest the point with the error on it.
Mhm. And regarding the quantum computer, I would like to ask you, what is from the energy point of view? I mean, what is the impact regarding their energy consumption?
I wouldn't actually know that at all. But I mean, the main thing is the cooling
The
of
cooling,
it.
exactly. This is what I'm telling about.
Yeah,
I'm talking
and
about. You spend a
I
lot of energy.
think, yeah. I mean, obviously Google would like to create a quantum computer because they could actually run millions, if not billions, of parallel search queries
Mhm.
at the same times. But the energy consumption, obviously GPUs are using up so much energy just now. I've no idea how much energy I would think it would probably be less. Microsoft and OpenAI are building $100 billion data center called Space Dark Gate. I forget the name of it, but that's going to consume so much energy, and they're building it in the desert
Mhm.
too. So I would think a quantum computer would probably use less energy than GPUs would.
Mhm. And another question that I have is like, why this elliptic curve? Why do they use this elliptic curve? Is there any reason why
Uh,
the elliptic curve, one of your transparencies you
because
mentioned? Yeah.
because the discrete square root problem is a hard problem. Y squared is equal to x mod p is a
Mhm.
really hard problem for a traditional computer. So elliptic curve is a hard problem at the current time, but it isn't a hard problem with a quantum computer.
There is another question. Thank you very much, Bill, for the responses. There is another a question from Rahul. Is there any way to protect harvest now, decrypt later, attacks now?
You've really got to be using a post-quantum cryptography method such as Kyber to be able to protect your data. So if you're still using elliptic curve or RSA, then it is possible to be able to break that in the future time. So it's not really a problem for individuals, it's more a problem for banks and governments with highly sensitive data that needs to be kept secure for at least 10 years.
And there is a request from one of our participants if we can get your presentation slides later on.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I move to another question from Imran. Do you see FHE applications in blockchain in future? Can FHE be fast enough soon for general use?
Yeah, yeah. So obviously that's full homomorphic encryption using lattices. It's possible to use partial homomorphic encryption method with pay layer and other methods just now. So some things in machine learning can be made from partial homomorphic encryption, but there is good improvements in full homomorphic encryption to mean that we should hopefully be able to run that on machines that don't use a GPU. So I think it will hopefully happen in the next few years. And the EU is building a homomorphic cloud just now. So we're part of the trustee project and we're building a homomorphic encryption cloud that you can take homomorphically encrypted data and process with it. So hopefully the EU can be ahead of the world in this type of technology.
Thank you, Bill. And one last question, because I know that you are in hurry. How far HC in practice, and what are the limitations? I'm sorry, I'm not from the field, so I don't know the acronyms. So I'm going to read it
So
as it comes.
what was it? So how
From our
far?
colleague from the University of Maribor, Marco Hombl, how far is HE in practice, and what are the limitations? Marco, if you would like to switch on your microphone, if you can understand, Bill, then you respond.
The limitations is we're dealing with very large polynomial values, and we need a lot of memory and processing power to be able to do this type of computation, just like machine learning takes a lot of computation. So it would be hoped that we can do this at the edge of the cloud. So Cloudflare is one company who are starting to put these GPUs at the edge of the cloud and local to you. So these GPUs could be used for homomorphic encryption methods so that you don't have to go into the cloud. But eventually we'll be building better circuits in our chips to be able to do the homomorphic encryption even on IoT devices. So I can see that within the next 2 or 3 years.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your questions. Thank you very much, Bill, for your kindness to contribute to this Athena talk and to respond directly to the questions that our audience has directed to you. I would like to thank Bill once again. I would like to thank all of you. This is the last Athena talk for this season. Have a nice summer. Stay healthy and see you soon. Have a nice day and a very nice summer. Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.